We'd like to welcome you to the Heart Leader Podcast, where heart and mind align. I'm your host, Amber, and I'm here with co-host Austin, and we'd like to know, do you have a passion to make a greater global impact? Are you ready to embrace leading with heart and love? If so, join us on this journey to become heart leaders who change the world. Each episode brings heart-centered connection, building stronger relationships, communities, and businesses. Let's take a deeper dive into what it means to be heart leaders. The Heart Leader Podcast starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heart Leader Podcast. I am absolutely giddy over today's guest. I have with me world-renowned fourth-generation psychic medium, Mark Anthony. Mark has a background as an Oxford-educated attorney who is licensed to practice law not only in Florida, but in Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. This has earned him the title as the psychic lawyer. But Mark is also known as the psychic explorer due to his extensive background in science, quantum physics, survival of consciousness, near-death experience, and history. He also dives into archaeology, philosophy, and theology, so this man has left no stone unturned. He examines mystical locations in the United States and in remote corners of the world, where he explores ancient ruins, mysteries, and supernatural phenomena. But Mark doesn't stop there. He appears nationwide on TV and radio, appearing on the CBS hit show, The Doctors, where he conducted a reading that led to cracking a cold case murder. Recently, he was featured on Gaia TV's Beyond Belief with George Noory in an episode called Quantum Leap to the Other Side with Mark Anthony. On radio, you can find Mark as the co-host of The Psychic and The Doc on Transformation Talk Radio. And as if that wasn't enough for Mark, he has a column in the Best Holistic Life magazine. Mark has best-selling books as well, including Never Letting Go, Evidence of Eternity, and his latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, was just nominated for a Pulitzer. So if you're looking for holiday gifts this season, you don't have to look any further. You have 3 to choose from, or just get all 3. And there is so much more I could say about this incredible man, but I would rather let him speak for himself at this point. So without taking any more time, Mark, I just want to say thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you, Amber. I'm honored to be here, and I've really been looking forward to spending time with you. I really enjoy the work that you do, and you got a great show. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've listened to your book on Audible 3 times. I binged it time after time after time because it's incredible. So I would like to dive into that first. Can you tell us a little bit about it, why you chose now to write such an in-depth book about the afterlife frequency and what it even means to have an afterlife frequency?
Well, there's so many reasons why I wrote this book, but if you'll indulge me for a minute, it started with, in the first chapter of the Afterlife Frequency, it starts in Bangkok, Thailand. And I was there with the best friend I ever had. His name was Billy. He was a linguistics genius. And let me tell you, if things had gone differently in that particular episode that I write about, I wouldn't be here right now. I don't even think I'd be in the material world right now. But I met Billy when I was 11 years old. We were the same age. We went to junior high, high school, college together. And we had this ongoing debate. We had both been raised in the Catholic faith. And, my parents were both mediums. This runs in my family for generations. Billy was an atheist. And so we had this ongoing debate, discussion. It wasn't an argument. It was an intellectual discussion that, he said, I don't believe any of it. And I always argued, if you will, the other side that there was. So after college, I went to law school. He went to Asia. And apparently he had this incredible gift for languages. He learned how to speak Japanese, Cantonese, Indonesian, and Thai. And he was teaching Japanese executives in Tokyo conversational English. And so I decided to go visit him, and I took about 2 months off, and we had all these amazing adventures throughout Japan and Southeast Asia. Well, one of the greatest honors of my life, Amber, is he asked me to perform his wedding ceremony. He met the love of his life. She was from Japan, just an amazing woman. And I'll never forget that day. I'm standing on the podium, and they had this wedding ceremony overlooking the ocean here in Florida, and it was a perfect spring day, no humidity. It was just beautiful. And there's my best friend standing in front of me with the woman that became my new best friend because she was marrying him. And I looked out at the crowd. Everybody I loved was there and alive. My parents were there, his parents, all of our friends from college and high school. It was just one of those shining moments in life. When you look back, you realize this is what makes life magical, is a moment like that. Unfortunately, Billy had always been plagued with a depression. And a couple years after that, he succumbed to suicide. And I was devastated. I mean, he was my brother. And that's a whole another story about that. A year and a half, and a year and a half later, I was speaking at a paranormal convention. Now, remember, Billy was an atheist, and he used to say to me, there's no science, there's no technology that can prove an afterlife or even, detect spirits. So I'm speaking at this paranormal convention at Estes Park in Colorado at the Stanley Hotel. And and for your listeners, visit the Stanley Hotel. It's beautiful. It's right at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And it's also considered by ghost hunters, paranormal investigators to have a lot of spiritual activity going on there. So I had just spoken, and then I was down in the main, conference hall, the convention room, and I'm signing books. My first book, had just come out, and there was all these paranormal investigators. They were displaying different types of spirit communication equipment, EMF scanners, electromagnetic frequency scanners, ultraviolet, infrared, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. And my manager, Rocky, she was with me, and she wanted to check out the equipment. So she's walking around, and I've known Rocky my whole life. And she was walking by this one table, and this paranormal investigator, his name is Chris, he was manning the table, and she walked by, and the spirit box, all of a sudden she hears, "Get Mark." And she stops, and she looks at this thing, and Chris is looking at her, and he said, "Huh." And all of a sudden it says, "Get Mark." And he goes, "Do you think he means your Mark Anthony?" So she's calling me Mark, and I look up, and they're like, come on. And I'm like, what's going on? So I get up, and I run over, and there's a crowd of people's there. And I'm like, what's going on? And when I walked up, my heart almost stopped because I heard, "Dude." And I recognized the voice, and I looked at Rocky, and then I heard, "Love you, bro." And it was Billy's voice coming out of this thing. And Rocky knew him. She goes, "Dear God, Mark, that was Billy." And I'm sitting there, and the investigator's like, "No, this is really unusual." He said, "First off, it calls Mark by name. Secondly, both of you identified the voice." And the thing is, we grew up in East Coast Central Florida in the surfing culture. He always called me dude, call me bro. In fact, I think the very last thing, no, I'm sure of it, very last thing he ever said to me, he hugged me and goes, "Love you, bro." And so initially I was like, how incredible that experience was. And then it dawned on me, wait a second, the atheist who said there is no technology, there is no science that can detect spirits, chose a technological device to communicate with me, and not just me, but in front of a whole crowd of people. And I realized, first off, that was very Billy. Okay, he always had to get the last word, and I'm glad that he did. And it was a great last word. but it was also him letting me know that there is an afterlife and that science and technology can eventually prove it. And so, Amber, that got the wheels in my head turning. And it took years, but that's what led to me writing The Afterlife Frequency, because it's the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. Now, I'm a medium. I'm used to communicating with people. But when a device that scans EMF bands, electromagnetic frequency bands, which are radio bands, projects the voice of the best friend I've ever had from the other side, that was not a coincidence. That was a spiritual synchronicity. And that happened for a reason. And it was supposed to happen at that time to open up the door for me to begin doing massive scientific research on spirit communication.
Yeah. And you talk about the whole connectedness of it, for it to come through from someone who was really debating the opposite. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, when we all have amazing experiences in life, it's just whether or not you recognize that they are. We all want miracles. Miracles happen to us all the time. It's just whether or not we're paying attention to it. And life is a miracle. The human body is a miracle. The birth of a baby is a miracle. The fact that you can take a seed, put it in the ground, and it grows into a tree, I mean, that's a miracle. And so many people feel that the universe is limited to the perception of our 5 physical senses, and it isn't. And that's not some theory, that's scientific fact. I mean, NASA has put forth the theory that over 90% of the universe is composed of dark matter, which is not perceptible to the human eye and not perceptible even to our technology at this point. Wow. So we're only seeing 10%. That's pretty incredible.
So was it that experience that guided you into connecting into the scientific aspect of the research that you've done, or have you always been interested in the science?
Always. And it started when I was 8 years old. I was looking at the stars with my dad. My dad was my hero when I was a little kid. He was always my hero, but when I was a little kid, he had been a Navy SEAL and he was a NASA engineer. Dad worked with astronauts. Okay.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And the reason that my family lived in East Coast, Central Florida is because of Kennedy Space Center, so, I mean, Dad worked with astronauts and we were looking at the stars one night, and he said, I remember about a year or so before he died, he said, "You were such a difficult child." I go, "Why? It wasn't a behavior problem." He goes, "No, it was always why, how, can you explain this?" He said the questions, but he said, "But I loved it." He goes, "I loved it because you were the best audience I ever had." And we're looking at the stars, and he said to me, he said, "Mark, there's no such thing as a mystery. There's only questions for which we do not yet have the answer. And if enough research, funding, focus, dedication goes into something, you will find the answer." He says, "And it will be based on science. It may take a very long time, but everything is explainable." And Amber, he was right. And some people say that the fact that I'm using scientific terms to explain spiritual phenomena somehow negates the spiritual aspect of it. Not at all. God has a delivery system. Okay. Yes. Things aren't magic. Things happen, and there is a reason how and why they happen. And ultimately, the answer is quantum physics. And that's miraculous. That's a miracle, how these things happen. And so thankfully, due to 20th and now 21st century science, we have at least our technology and our science has evolved to the point where we're making these discoveries. Traditionally, faith has been in one corner, people of faith. Then on the other hand, there's people of science. And it really kicked up in the Enlightenment with Sir Isaac Newton. And from what I understand about Sir Isaac Newton, yes, he invented calculus, the laws of gravity, laws of motion, laws of optics. He was not a pleasant person. Is that he was condescending, he was mean, he was nasty. He was kind of like, have you ever seen Big Bang Theory?
Yes.
He was kind of like Sheldon on steroids,
Yes.
Insult people on. But the thing is, he was Sir Isaac Newton. He was absolutely brilliant. But he believed in God, but not an afterlife, which is interesting, or a soul. And he spent more time studying the Bible, looking for hidden messages. So it's what I call the Newton paradox. Believed in God, didn't believe in a soul, searched the Bible for messages, didn't believe in an afterlife. So he was a paradoxical person. And so what Newton's developed was what's known as reductive materialism. In other words, the universe is only what is observable, and that the molecular is simply a miniaturized version of our world. So the Newtonian reductionist materialists are in one corner, and they look at the people of faith as a bunch of, primitive superstition, grasping, clinging to mythology, and people of faith are looking at them as heretical, blasphemous, atheists. Here comes the 20th century. Albert Einstein, Louis de Broglie, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Nikola Tesla. So you start getting all these brilliant minds that prove that everything's made of molecules, which are made of atoms, Now, why didn't Newton believe this? Why? Because he lived in the 17th century. They didn't have electron microscopes. The technology couldn't get there. So I'm giving Newton a pass. Yeah, because if Newton lived today, he'd be big-time quantum physicist, all right? Electrons go to atoms are what makes up molecules. And then atoms are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are made of the smallest particle, quantum, quanta for plural, which is pure electromagnetic energy. Now, for the science people watching the show and for your benefit, because I know you understand quantum physics, an electron is technically a quantum because it is a 1/1800th the size of a proton. So what this means, Amber, is that you, me, the air we're breathing, the radio waves the show's being broadcast on, the crust of the Earth, the core of the Earth, the nuclear reactions happening in the sun, the distance between the stars, everything on the subatomic level is made of pure electromagnetic energy. And that's why we're all interconnected. All right. And that's what people of faith have been telling us for thousands of years. We're all interconnected. And now we know they're right because of science.
Yes. And it doesn't make one more right or less right. It just means we're using it differently. Exactly. I would offer.
Exactly.
And have you found in the discussions that you have, and I know, again, going back to this amazing book, you break it down in a way that creates a bridge. And that's why I find it so valuable and so fascinating. It isn't science or spirituality, or even that it has to be kind of in two separate camps. You come at it from such a heart-centered way of, okay, both have very valid points and it kind of bridges the gap, but it's more about how you use it to communicate then beyond just the barriers of what we know as humanity and the value that comes out of that. So can you dive a little bit into how you utilize this energy, this connection for the communication that you have, and even the technique that you came up with, the raft technique, which is brilliant, and I love it.
Well, thank you. In the Afterlife Frequency, I introduced a lot of new terms to describe spirit communication. The reason I do that, Amber, is because in the 19th century, between, let's say, the 1840s all the way up to roughly the 1930s. That was kind of the golden age of spiritualism, which is where mediums were becoming very popular, particularly in the United Kingdom, in France, in the United States. That's why, you know, when you hear psychics talk about clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, those are French terms for clear seeing, clear hearing, clear knowing. And but the terminology was developed in the Victorian era, and there it has remained. And I want to update things to explain it on the basis of 21st century science. And one of the key terms to understand in my book is the electromagnetic soul, the EMS. And that describes what we really are. And every person of faith, every great teacher of faith, whether it was the Hindu sages of India 5,000 years ago, through Zoroaster, through Moses, through Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Jesus, Muhammad, Native American spirituality, Gandhi, all the way up to today, has described that the soul, who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and then moves on after the body dies. And we know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from the field of neuroscience, the study of the brain, that the brain has a complex, the most complex electrical field in the body. And so the electromagnetic soul describes what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy. And that so when we die, your brain is like a drop of water. It doesn't, you know, it leaves the body and plunges into this ocean, this eternal sea of consciousness, which I call the collective consciousness. Your individuality, who and what you are, remains intact. But you can, you know, you can adjust your frequency to communicate with us in this world. So the reason I'm explaining this is because the EMS, and a lot of scientists are already using the term. It's such an honor, you know. And I heard like Dr. Gary Schwartz, who wrote the foreword for the book. He's head of psychology, parapsychology, physics, surgery at the University of Arizona. He's one of the chief afterlife researchers in the world. He wrote the foreword, and he calls me up and he goes, "EMS, electromagnetic soul. I love it. I'm using it." And I was like,
Love it.
I was like, "Thank you, Dr. Schwartz." And so the electromagnetic soul indicates that we have this very sophisticated electromagnetic field, which is housed in our brain. So think of your brain like a computer hard drive. Your computer hard drive doesn't create the programs on your computer. It hosts them. And so that when the computer crashes, the hard drive crashes, those programs are uploaded to a higher frequency. So look at it like this. We live in AM radio. Our world, our material world, our planet Earth is AM radio. It's energy, it has amplitude, it has frequency, but a lower frequency. The other side is higher frequency. The afterlife frequency is another dimension moving at a higher vibrational rate. So when we die, we quantum leap from AM radio to FM radio. And spirit communication, not just mediumship, but whether it's a visitation in a dream, a near-death experience, a deathbed vision, a shared death experience, an out-of-body experience. That's why I wrote this book, is to explain that these different forms of spirit communication are not separate phenomenon and should be in separate categories. They all have the common denominator that involve energy transfer and frequency alignment. So all forms of spirit communication, whether it's through a medium, a direct contact that you may have, an out-of-body experience, near-death experience, involves raising the vibration from AM and the FM frequency lowering their vibration. You get a frequency match in the zone in between, and there's the spirit communication. Now, I'm not giving away the whole book. This is just a snippet of it to help you understand. And I promise all of your listeners, all my potential readers, this is not a dry technical treatise.
It really isn't. It is like a story told with all of this amazing information from a quantum physics level, but it doesn't go deep into quantum. But there's enough, and it's told in a story way, especially if you get it on Audible in some way. By the way, your voice is amazing for storytelling. So thank you for that. But it was easy to listen to. Again, as I said, I listened to it 3 times.
Thank you.
It was very easy. So I do highly recommend it in that way.
Well, I suffered through so many boring books in law school and in the practice of law. Yeah, I mean, I'd sit there and you're trudging through this. And I remember when I was in law school, I said, I want to write a book or books someday. I'm not going to do this to anybody.
Yeah.
It's like one of my favorite judges. His name was Judge Learned Hand. Now, I always joke that if you're going to name your son Learned, he better be like a judge someday, or he better be a martial arts expert, because he's going to get beat up on the way home from school every day. Kind of need like Learned. But anyway, he lived roughly a century ago, and Learned Hand, he never made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And here's why. In the 1930s, he went to a Socialist Party meeting. And so when he was being considered or vetted to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, that nixed it. He was looked at as a communist sympathizer, and it's really a shame. I mean, he was, a young guy, and he wanted to check out this party. But the thing is, Learned Hand developed a lot of concepts that shaped and formed our legal system to this day. And he wrote beautiful opinions. I mean, you wanted to read them. He wrote it, and it just, flowed. So one day I was in the law library, and I was suffering through my federal basic income taxation homework. I know it was required in law school because it teaches you how to read and construe statutes. And let me tell you something: if you can make it through the IRS, you can read anything. And I had a headache, and I couldn't make heads or tails out of anything, and none of it made sense. And I took a breather, and I was sitting there at this table, and I saw this stack of books behind me, and there was a book about Learned Hand. It was one of those woo, woo, woo moments. So I pulled this book out, and I opened it, and Amber, I kid you not, it opens right to this page where it was a quote from Learned Hand writing about the Internal Revenue Code.
Oh my gosh.
It is a labyrinth of cross-exception to cross-exception. He said, to the point where the words dance before my eyes in a meaningless procession. And I started laughing, because if Learned Hand had a hard time reading the Internal Revenue Code, I was starting to feel a lot better about myself. It's
like he had written what you were feeling right there.
And that's one of those synchronicities, because I really needed a boost at that time. And something similar to me happened when I was writing the Afterlife Frequency, in the chapter where I'm talking about, how and why spirits and psychic activity can pick up on future events. It involves space-time, which is a real thing. It was something Einstein came up with, and Stephen Hawking talked a whole lot about, and everyone in the quantum physics field. I was having a really hard time understanding this one concept, much less how to explain it. And in my research, a quote from Werner Heisenberg comes up. Okay, Heisenberg, one of Einstein's friends, one of the smartest guys the planet's ever produced. The quote said, "When you think you understand quantum physics, you really don't."
Yep. Yeah, drudging through some of those physics books, you're just like, your eyes do exactly what the IRS code does. You just start to glaze over, and you're like, okay, let's come back to this later.
Yeah, they do. And you walk away, and all of a sudden, that's it. It does make sense, you know?
That aha moment that we call, 100%. And this book really does help. If you desire to understand how the energy flows, but not be overloaded by it, you do a really great job.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. You do talk a lot about the brain connection, the gut connection, the pineal gland, and you mentioned feeling, but there isn't much discussion about the heart, I noticed. And for me, that is a key point. So is there a reason for that? Is there a connection you feel when you communicate through the heart? Or can we dive into that a little bit? Because I personally would love to understand that.
Well, the thing about, I know there's a lot of people that feel that heart intuition, okay, that the heart is a component in spirit communication. And that's not been my experience or my research. Okay, the heart is the most powerful electrical field in the body, which makes sense. It's a biomechanical pump. It's got to work, okay? And, back during, and this is something I addressed in Afterlife Frequency, the discussion during the time of Leonardo da Vinci is, where's the soul? Is it in the brain or is it in the heart? And da Vinci concluded it was in the brain, because the heart is a pump, a magnificent pump, but a pump nonetheless. And of course, it has to have the most powerful electrical field, because it runs 24/7. And the brain has the most complex electrical field, because it's the seat, it houses the soul. And then directly below the heart is the solar plexus, which is the second most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex in the human body. And the pineal gland in the brain is the receptor area for visual, data, auditory messages from spirits. And the solar plexus is for sensory feeling, physical sensations. And there's, according to the people who write about the science of the heart or heart intuition, they talk about three different types of intuition. Implicit knowledge, which means that we react to situations based on our memories and what we already know. Okay, it's our experience. Then there's energetic sensitivity. It's how the nervous system detects and responds to the environment in electromagnetic fields. The third is non-local, which is what I call spiritual situational awareness, which is a chapter in an extremely important concept in my book. But essentially, the heart, you see, people say that, oh, well, the heart, this is the intuition, this is what I'm feeling. Well, of course. Why? Because it moves all the time. And so when you're afraid, it moves really quick. When you're in love, it moves in a different way. When you're feeling different senses, so its activity increases or decreases, because it's the pump, it's the engine that's running our body. And now your brain feels these things too, but you don't feel the sensation in the brain, because it's sending the electrical impulses to the heart. So, but I'm not negating the heart, because, every poet, every spiritualist, every romanticist writes about, oh, the heart. Yeah, because you see someone you're really attracted to or someone you love. What's happening is the heart is the physical manifestation of these feelings. And it's synonymous with emotions, because it's the physical organ which actually engages in the physical reactions to emotional situations. And what's fascinating is an octopus has 3 hearts and 9 brains. And it, the main brain is in octopus's head, and each one of its arms has another brain, and it's got 3 hearts to distribute the electrical activity throughout this creature. Well, scientists have referred to the solar plexus as the second brain, because of its complex electromagnetic activity throughout the body. And this is where in psychic, activity, you feel sensations. For example, parents, oh my God, something's wrong with my child. You feel it here, and then you get the call. Talk to any first responder, anybody in the military, my gut feeling. Why do you think? Do you think that's just an expression? No, because you feel it there. Now, the heart will start pounding, but once again, the heart's receiving these messages, and where is it situated? Right between the two. So I don't think that the heart is an integral part of receiving messages from spirits or psychic activity. What I think it is, it's the barometer that reacts to the overall picture. We also have to realize that the body is an integrated unit, and the entire body has a neural net. And in other words, wiring throughout our body that electrical impulses are flowing through. But when it comes to spirit communication, the two receptor areas are the pineal gland and the brain. And the pineal gland, most mysterious organ in the body. It's been researched for over 100 years. We still don't understand it. Little tiny thing, bigger than a grain of rice, smaller than a lima bean. It regulates our brain wave frequencies, our ability to perceive light, our circadian rhythms when we wake up, when we're hungry, when we're randy, when we're sleepy. It also is why we get jet lagged, because it once it's moved from one location to another, it's reacting to the Earth's electromagnetic field. That's why we get jet lag, is because it takes the pineal gland time to adjust. And the thing is, it also has calcite and magnetite crystals in it. What was the first radio? Piece of quartz crystal with copper wire running low levels of electricity through it. So what we have in our brain, in the pineal gland, is an extremely sophisticated communication center. And then, of course, you have the solar plexus, this intricate bundle of nerves that picks up on electromagnetic activity. The heart, in my experience, it's not the antenna that the solar plexus is or the pineal gland is. So I hope that answers your question.
It definitely answers it. I know that there's a lot of research in other directions. So it's just interesting to hear both sides and to seek to understand the difference in that.
Oh, look at it this way. We can't live without any one of those. You can't live without a brain. You can't live without a heart. Can't live without, it's funny. I was saying that if I only had a heart, if I only had a brain, if I only had courage.
Yes.
Sound familiar?
It does. Then the cross to that is, well, you could survive by being brain dead. And we can go without food for a while. But the moment your heart stops, you're gone.
Well, technically, when there's no brainwave activity, you're dead. You can be artificially kept alive. And I've been, many people who've had. Actually, I want to tell the story, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
I was called about not quite a year ago from a friend of mine. She was in tears, and I knew her from the time I was a little kid, and I hadn't seen her in years. And she said, "Mark, my son's on life support. They said he's brain dead." And what had happened was her son had brain cancer, brain tumors, and he was at home. He was about 20 years old, and they went out to the store. And when she came back, he was floating face down in the pool. And he had flatlined, and the doctor said, "He's gone. We're only keeping him alive." She said, "Mark, I don't know what to do." And her husband was there. Her kids are on the line. And she said, "Can you contact my parents?" And I said, "Well, I'll do my best." And her mother came through. And then I said, "Wait a second, someone else is coming through." And I started describing. She goes, "My God, that's Mikey." Now, the father's name was Michael. They called the son Mikey, not Mike Jr., but Mikey. And he said, "Mom, when you're ready, you'll know, but that's not now." Okay. So I delivered that message, and I said, I forget the sign, but I said, "Who's the Capricorn?" And the father goes, "I'm the Capricorn." He keeps saying Giorgio and Greggy, Giorgio and Greggy. And the father goes, "Oh my God." He said, "It was a joke between us. He used to call me Giorgio." All right. So now I knew that I had the spirit communicating. I go, "Who's Greggy?" They said, "We can't think of that right now." I said, "When you're ready, you'll make the decision, but you're going to have to make that decision." And he said, "And when you see Mars, think of me." And they go, "What?" I go, "I don't know what that means." 2 weeks later, she calls me again. She goes, "Mark, I want to thank you." She goes, 4 days after you did that connection for us, it was on the phone because of COVID, I couldn't go to the hospital. Otherwise, I would have gone there. She said, "I realized it was time." because he was flatlined. They brought in several experts. He was dead. So they removed life support and he passed. But right before they removed life support, this young man walked into his room in the hospital, and he was a foster child that we took in when he was in high school. His name was Greg, and we called him Greggy. Oh. So Greggy walked in at the precise, remember Giorgio and Greggy, he called his father Giorgio, and Greggy showed up just as they were terminating life support. And she goes, and you know, a couple nights ago, the family, we were in the backyard, we were having, we were grilling some burgers. And my other son said, hey, look at that star. It's all big and orange. That's Mars. And she said, we all looked at each other and said, oh my God, when you see Mars, think of me. Now, what happened there? His body was technically alive, but his electromagnetic soul was still tethered to the body, but able to communicate. Now, I've communicated with a number of people in this situation, and people that are comatose. He told them, you'll be ready. You'll know when you're ready to terminate life support. But I mean, anybody could have just said that, but he gave them facts. First off, Giorgio, I didn't know, because I never met his father. I didn't know that Mikey called his father Giorgio as a joke. I certainly didn't know about Greggy. Okay, so he validated who he was. And then a couple weeks later, just as they were about to terminate life support, Greggy walks in. Why did he do that? That was a validation that you're doing the right thing. He gave them a future event, a fact, Greggy. Then he validated that further because he knew his family would be together. And when they saw Mars, the planet Mars, appear over the horizon after sunset, he said, think of me, and they did. And so this also ties into, number one, the electromagnetic soul theory. Number two, that it's the brain which hosts the consciousness. It doesn't create it. Three, that spirits, because they are electromagnetic energy, and on the quantum level, quantum physicists have theorized that time doesn't exist in the way that we know it, which is why spirits can perceive future events. So being in an EMS, he was able to put all that together and give his parents the specific pieces of information to validate and help guide them through the most horrible thing any parent can go through.
That's incredible. So how do you pull yourself out of the way, step out of any disbelief? I know you're seasoned at this now, but I know several individuals who desire to practice, even if it's just receiving for themselves. And the big thing is they may receive messages, whether it's just hearing a song on the radio or anything, and they just start cycling in disbelief, and they don't know how to pull themselves out of the message. What is any little bit of advice that you can give for how to pull yourself out of it and just have a conversation, or give and receive, which is our theme for the month? Just have that give and receive with whatever you're receiving the message from.
They have to employ the raft technique. And the raft technique I explain in detail in the Afterlife Frequency. And, my book isn't about turning everybody into a medium, because a lot of my colleagues are like, be medium. And all I see is a lot of frustrated people who say, I can't do it. Well, that's because not everybody is a medium. But that doesn't mean that everybody can't have a mediumistic or psychic experience. It's like I can swim, but I'm never going to be an Olympic gold medal winner. I can play guitar, but I'm never going to be a Jimmy Page or an Eric Clapton or, a George Harrison. But I can bang around on a guitar and have some fun. And so I was trying to figure out how to explain this. And I hit that horrible writer's block. Bam. Couldn't get a thing. So I thought, all right, I'm going to go for a walk on the beach. That always helps. So I'm walking down my driveway toward the ocean, and all of a sudden I get cold chills and tingles. So I go, that feels like a spirit. Okay. Because that's what it feels. That's why people think spirit communication is scary. They get cold chills and tingles. What that is, that's electromagnetic souls, their energy field interfacing with yours. And the physical sensation is the same as the one in the flight or fight response, is cold chills and tingles. So I did an about face and headed towards this bike path near my house. So I'm like, okay. So it was about 11 in the morning. I'm walking down the bike path and I see these two objects shining in the light. And I walk over to them and it's a nickel and a penny. So I go to pick them up and I hear my mother's voice. My parents are in spirit. My mother was of Italian descent. And I hear, if their head's down, it's bad luck. And I start laughing because that's one of those Italian superstitions. We have superstitions for all occasions. And then I hear my dad's voice. It's money. Grab it. So I'm laughing, And so I pick up and I got the nickel and the penny. I'm looking. I go, oh, 6 cents. I go, wait a second, 6 cents. I'm like, okay. They're telling me something. And the cold chills and tingles intensify. And I see in my mind's eye my father standing in the ocean holding this blue canvas raft. And he looked like he was maybe 37, 38, like he did, when I was a kid, because, they had me a little bit later in life. And I go, okay, he's holding this raft. And then they told me, teach people how to recognize signs from spirits, accept the contact is real, feel it without fear, trust the message. Raft. That was it. So I ran back to my computer, flipped it on, the words flew out, and that was how I got the raft technique. And so in the Afterlife Frequency, this is my book, The Afterlife Frequency, I teach people the 4-step raft technique, how to recognize signs from spirits. And they walked me through raft to do this. Okay, when I started getting the cold chills and tingles, I knew, okay, something's up. Accept the contact is real. I had the coins in my hand. I knew it. It's the 3rd step. This is to answer your question. Feel without overthinking. This is where everybody goes wrong. Oh, this must be a coincidence. Must be my imagination. Oh, I'm making this up. I can't. And that's where most people fizzle out. So you have to feel it, don't overthink it, and then trust the message. And the Afterlife Frequency will go through this with you and give you some exercises and teach you how to incorporate this. It's not going to turn everybody into a medium, but it'll help you when you do a reading with a medium, or if you have a direct experience, maybe a spirit talks to you in a dream, or you get a sense they're around you. It will teach you how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust. It'll help people make sense of a near-death experience, of a deathbed vision when somebody they love is transitioning and that person is interacting with and talking about spirits of their loved ones, and those in close proximity also feel it. See, a deathbed vision becomes a shared death experience when more than one person begins to experience this. And those of us who are near-death experience researchers, this has been being documented for centuries and now very heavily documented around the world. So that's what the raft technique does. Is it teaches people how to get that their own innate skepticism out of the way so that you can actually begin to experience and benefit from spiritual contact.
It's amazing. Now, I know you're just mentioning feeling, and being a medium, you deal with a lot of people who are in mourning. Yes. And are in very challenging situations. How do you, as someone who is very heart-centered, how do you navigate those situations and not take on what they're navigating, but still be there for them in that heart-centered way? How do you bridge that? I mean, you're just like this bridge in all these situations. How do you navigate that? What advice can you give someone who's also in that position?
Yeah, it's just like when people say that, that the hospital and the doctors and nurses don't seem like they care. Well, it's not that they don't care, they're being professionals. Because if they get emotionally caught up in the suffering of their patient, they're not going to be objectively doing their job. And my training as an attorney, I can't get caught up in the woes and sorrows of my client because it clouds my objectivity. It's the same thing as a medium. A lot of the people that we do readings for, and I'm not heartless, okay? I mean, I feel for these people, but my job is to connect with the spirits and transmit the information as directly and objectively as possible, because then I'm not doing my job. If I sit there and go, oh, I'm so sorry, so sorry. Well, yes, of course, absolutely, my condolences. But my job is to give you as much information as possible to guarantee that this is the spirit who is communicating and transmit messages and things that I couldn't possibly know. And that's what helps people. But it's certainly, there are many readings, all of them really touch me and affect me. But the other thing is, when I get into my zone, I'm doing what I do, and then afterwards, I can reflect upon it. But it's all about being a professional. You have to be a professional. It's like when I was a lawyer, if someone came into my office and said, well, I really did this, it's like, well, I can't represent you. You're a criminal. Well, whether or not they did it, my job was not to justify their criminality. My job was to protect the constitutional rights that everyone is guaranteed. I love what Jerry Seinfeld said one time. He said that monopoly is like life, and lawyers read the inside of the box.
Yes. Well, I have two final questions for you as we're wrapping up here. The first one is, do you view death differently now that you don't just comprehend that there's something else beyond this physicality, you've touched it, you communicate with it. So do you feel you have a different perspective on death than maybe others do?
Probably, but I had a near-death experience when I was 4 years. I started communicating with spirits when I was 3.5. I had a near-death experience when I was 4. So I don't know how to answer that question, because I've always known that there's something beyond this existence. So now that doesn't mean I'm in any big rush to get there. A lot of people say, well, if the other side's so wonderful, why doesn't people just kill themselves? Well, because we're here in the material world for a reason, and every day that we're here is a gift, although many days it doesn't feel that way. And the other thing we need to understand is death is inevitable. It's going to happen. So while I'm here, and not just me, but for everybody, make each day count. Do something positive. Messages come from spirits when it's about peace, love, healing, and resolution. If you think you're receiving a spiritual message that incites you to commit anger, bigotry, hatred, and violence, that is not a message from the divine. That is not a message from a spirit. That is a message from someone's ego, edging God out. Okay? And think about it. Whenever you've done anything negative or hurtful to another person, it's when you're acting out of ego. It's all me, 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 me. You're not acting out of love and concern for another person. And so messages from spirits, love, healing, resolution.
Absolutely love that message. Final question. How can people get a hold of your book to give it as a gift this holiday season, either to themselves or to someone that they care about?
The Afterlife Frequency, it's on sale worldwide at all fine bookstores. It's on Amazon.com. And if you want to go to my website, you can, it'll give you the link to Amazon. My website is the same as the book, afterlifefrequency.com. And if you go to my website, you can sign up, for readings. I do readings. I have a show every Thursday, The Psychic and the Doc, with my co-host, the amazing Dr. Pat Basili, spiritual behavioral psychologist. She's a good friend to Amber and to this show as well. Absolutely, it's such an honor working with her. And we take calls from listeners. And please sign up for my newsletter, but the afterlifefrequency.com or just afterlifefrequency.com. And so many people are facing the holidays without a loved one. And this time of year is supposed to be joyous and happy. And sometimes it just reminds us of the pain and the sadness of losing a loved one. And so the Afterlife Frequency is the gift that will help those coping with loss, because it helps people who have lost loved ones to suicide, homicide. It helps people coping with survivor's guilt, post-traumatic stress disorder. I talk a lot to parents who've lost children. So this is the healing and empowering gift for those coping with loss, and the gift that you don't know what else to give somebody, and that's the afterlife frequency.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's just the gift to give anyone who's curious about mediumship, about how it connects to quantum sciences. My field is quantum science, and it was an amazing connection point for me. And I'm kind of a hardcore skeptic in many ways between how you connect mediumship, communicating with the other side, and quantum science. So you won me over, my friend, very, very deeply.
Thank you. That's an honor, Amber. And I want to thank you. And I especially want to thank all of your listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in to Amber's show every week.
Oh, thank you. And I want to take a moment as well to thank everyone who has tuned in to our Heart Leader podcast. Mark is an amazing version of a heart leader, and I'm very grateful that he joined the show. But I'm also very grateful that each and every one of you have tuned in. Would like to extend all of our gratitude to the Transformation Network and everyone who works there. You amazing people make this possible, and we love you dearly. Until next time, I am your host, Amber, and we look forward to seeing you in our Sui Vera community.